Well, for more on this, we're joined now by our guest, writer and journalist Austen Ivereigh, who's written a book on Pope Francis under the title The Great Reformer, Francis and the Making of a Radical Pope. Hello, thank you very much for being with us on France24. 2 years in, the Pope's popularity, is it intact or has the element of surprise perhaps worn off?
Well, I think it's remarkable to the extent to which the world remains fascinated by Francis. And indeed, the Catholic community are, I would say, as energized by this pontificate now, 2 years later, as they were when he was first elected. He's become less surprising, or at least the surprises are now expected. But the surprises haven't ceased. He himself has said many times that a church that doesn't surprise is a church which is dead and needs to be taken to the operating theatre, that where the Holy Spirit is present, we should expect surprises. So he is producing change, he is producing reform. It's not always the reform and the change that people either want to see or expect to see, but nonetheless, behind the scenes, I think the shifts in the church are really very, very substantial.
And is he as popular within the church as he is with his followers?
Well, I think at this stage of his pontificate, 2 years in, one can say that there are clearly groups which are very worried by him, and there are groups which are very critical of him. I would say that in the United States, particularly, there are groups of conservative Catholics who worry that he is undermining the Church's witness of the clarity of doctrine. But I think they're also worried by his critiques of capitalism, of the way that the world economy functions. They think he doesn't understand that you need more market, not less market. So there are specific criticism from specific groups. But I would say overall, among Catholics, and certainly the statistics show it, he is incredibly popular. And in fact, one can talk about a kind of Francis effect of people going back to church, people being present in the sacraments in a way that they haven't been for many years. There are lots of anecdotal reports of this so-called Francis effect.
Interesting, he's also popular with non-believers, which maybe helps the church make it more relevant to them too. Might it also help bring back those faithful who'd been rejected by the church? I'm thinking of homosexuals, divorcees, etc.
Well, I mean, this Pope has said a number of times that this is exactly how he sees his mission. You know, he's an evangelizer, he's a missionary. He wants to reach out beyond the boundaries of the church to those who are alienated from the church to show them the love and the mercy of God. Specifically, of course, he's called the Synod of Bishops, which is an 18-month long process of deliberation on the very difficult question of how the divorced and remarried can be reintegrated into church life. He's been speaking about this just in a major Mexican television interview that's just been going out recently. He said it also very clearly a couple of weeks ago in the Vatican. He said, look, religious people, you can either focus on, as it were, preserving the saved, or you can want to save the lost. And he clearly sees his mission, based on that of Christ, as going out. Now, this is a very, very complex questions about how you can reintegrate people who are alienated from the church without, of course, compromising church teaching or compromising the witness in the case of marriage to indissolubility. But he's confident that with the Synod, he has initiated a process of discernment, which he believes the Holy Spirit is present in and will produce rapid, good, creative answers to the crisis of the family. And I think this is just one example of the mechanisms, the confidence he has, if you like, in the mechanisms which he's introduced.
Now, as you've mentioned, some within the church feel he's going too far. You call him radical. Do we know where Pope Francis sets the limit to reform?
Yes, I mean, one of the reasons I called my book The Great Reformer, and the subtitle, in fact, uses the word radical, is that both these words, I think, are misunderstood. There is a tradition of radical Catholic church reform, which is there really from the Middle Ages onwards, which is all about recalling the church to its dependence on Christ, the gospel, its mission to evangelize, rather than on status, power, wealth, and those things. And so he's a radical in that tradition. He's not a radical in the sense that he wishes to modernize or change church teaching. He is, in fact, a very vigorous defender and teacher of a solid Catholic doctrine, as we've seen time and time again. So the reform that he's bringing about is really the conversion, first of all, of hearts. He wants to convert the church. And then secondly, he wants to bring people to God and to the church. And he knows that it's not enough to just preach the message, that we have to convert ourselves in order to be credible witnesses. And also, that people will recognize Christ and God in the church when the church is willing itself to change and reform.
Austen Ivereigh, thank you very much for having talked to us on France24. Thank you. Well, that's it for this hour live from Paris.